This is Patrick Hoban with The Growth Seat. Today, I thought I would talk about one of my favorite people when it comes to leadership and perspectives, and that's James Stockdale. And Stockdale did what is called, or created what's called the Stockdale Paradox. And this is a paradox that I think is just incredibly important. And Jim Collins talks a lot about it when he was writing his book, Good to Great. And that's probably the first time that I learned about it. The idea with the Stockdale paradox is that we have to hold two things together in our hearts and minds at the same time. One is to confront the brutal facts, right? So we need to take a look at what's happening in front of us at the moment and look at the good, bad, ugly. Then the next thing is that we can never stop having a relatively positive outlook on the future. So the brutal facts in front of us and still believing, right? Still having this idea of it's going to be okay. And that is incredibly important when it comes to leadership, life, you name it. Stockdale was interesting. Again, he was a high level leader in the armed forces. Was shot down. A fighter jet pilot shot down, and spent 8 years as a POW. And that is, 8 years. I can't even comprehend what that might be like. And he was tortured 20 times. He spent, what was it, 2 or 4 years in isolation itself. And so there's this idea of a POW camp, how horrible that is, not having much food, not having the ability to, have purpose and meaning and direction in your life. And then you're also thrown into isolation where you are by yourself for huge chunks of time, months and years. And he never stopped believing that they would eventually get out, And he talks about an important concept that hope is dangerous. And I think that that's an interesting idea because I'm very hopeful. He talks about optimism can kill you. And that to me is like, whoa, what is that? Because I'm a highly optimistic person. And I really believe in the idea that we can create our own success in our lives by our perspective, by our hope, by our optimism. But what's interesting with Stockdale is he talked so much about this idea of pragmatism, this idea of realism. And you need to make sure, confront the brutal facts in front of you, be realistic about what's happening to you in your life at that moment. Because if you're too pink sky world, if you're too, oh, the world is perfect and fine and there's never going to be a problem, that's going to hit you in the face. And I've definitely had times in my life where I've been hit in the face. And I think that what is key is that I want to have this balance. I want to have this dual focus of life can be hard. Life is hard at times, but also my path is a good path. I want to always remember that, I was given this great life. And I'm sorry, if you live in a first world country, you are living a good life. It's crazy that 100 years ago, 80 years ago, people didn't even have hot water. I mean, you couldn't take a hot shower. And today, we're so upset if we don't have this and that perfectly in our lives. I think that it is a great lesson that you can get from someone like James Stockdale, that you can have this resilience. You can have this idea of making sure that you control how you see your life and the world. You control how happy you are, how upset you are. You also control the reality that you decide to see the world with. And I know that might sound funny because reality is reality, right? Nope. We can experience different realities with the same people living similar lives. And I think that it is key that I want to make sure that with my life, that I'm choosing my perspective. I'm choosing my reality. It's an important thing where um, your identity, right? So, how you see yourself, your identity will create your reality. If you see yourself as a hero, which Stockdale wouldn't say he was a hero, but he was, there's no doubt that he was a hero. His perspective and identity as a hero helped him, allowed him to push through years and years and years of a horrible existence. He chose, it was so interesting. If you do much reading on him, he created a communication system of taps on the walls between the different POWs. And it allowed them to talk because they weren't allowed to talk otherwise. So this little tap system allowed them to communicate and support each other, as well as tell each other if there was a problem, as well as tell each other, danger, whatever. But they figured out a way. They were resilient in the regard that they wouldn't let their captors define whether they would survive or not. They wouldn't let their captors define whether they would be relatively happy or not. They chose that for themselves. That was their identity, was that they would survive. And I think that, again, it's a great concept with him where he said that the people who were like, oh my God, we're going to get out by Christmas, they didn't last. It was the people who said, we will get through today and then we'll survive until tomorrow. Those are the people who were confronting the brutal facts in front of them and saying, we'll survive today. They had a relative perspective that we will make it through. And that's key because sometimes life is so hard. Sometimes you get hit in the face. And what we all have to do is make sure that we just get through this day. That we make sure that when life is good, we're happy about it. And when life is tough, we can still find a way to be happy about it. And I'm not at all saying, oh, just be happy every day. Nope. That's not reality. What I am saying is that we can choose to see what's happening to us in our lives in such a way that we can still be happy. And that's what I want to do with my life. I want to make sure and say, my path is a good path, even with the bumps in it, even with the large mountains in it, even with the sharp left turns that I never expected and never wanted. My path is still a good path. My life is still a good life. And I want to make sure that I live my life that way, that I help my family to learn that same perspective, that we're all good. We're all good. And then as a leader, we all have to make sure that we teach resilience, that we teach the Stockdale Paradox. Confront the facts in front of you, right? But never stop believing, right? Never stop believing that you're going to be okay. Never stop believing that you can create success. Never stop believing that it's all about you, right? You are the reason that you will be successful. There's a statement I love in life that it's all your fault. So it's all my fault. My life is my fault. And I need to be accountable for my life. You need to be accountable for your life. If your life is not great, it's your fault. If your job is not great, it's your fault because you can always change your job. You can always be better at your job. You can always be someone who walks into work and you're the bright shining light at work. And then all of a sudden, I bet your job will get better. But what we have to do is that we have to remember that our lives, what's happening in our lives, who our friends are, how our family is, it's our fault. And the more that we take accountability for that, All right. The more that we say, I will create success in my life and happiness in my life and resilience in my life, and I will not be a victim in my life. I will not say, oh, poor me. Because the more that you say, oh, poor me, the more that you are giving the, the end result of your life, of how when you're done with this world, you're going to look back at your life and say how good or bad it was. If you're a hero, you'll say, you know what? I did the best with what I had. If you're a victim, you're going to say, oh my God, it was so bad, and my job was bad, and my parents were bad, and my kids were bad, and victim. It all sounds bad, right? So, having a victim mentality is just yucky. It's just ugly. And no one wants to hear you be a victim, by the way. No one wants to hear the poor me stories. So when you go home and vent at the end of your day, your spouse or friend, whatever, might be good and listen. They don't want to hear your negativity. No one wants to come home at the end of a day and have their spouse just spew negativity at them about how bad their day was, because it's all victim mentality. The Stockdale Paradox says, I'm going to confront the brutal facts in front of me, and I'm going to make the best out of it. And so venting is confronting the brutal facts in front of you, but then being a victim, but then not actually allowing yourself to be the hero of your own story. And just like James did in that POW camp, he was the hero of his own story. And he decided that, again, there was one time a story about him in isolation where, just to make sure he didn't go crazy, which is what will happen in isolation, he would create poetry. He would play entire golf games in his head, sitting in a little concrete cell. He'd play a golf game, and he would choose to focus on how beautiful the grass was, what a gorgeous day it was, how bad that sand bunker was. He created all of that, every hole in his head. And that is taking control of your own perspective and your own life. That is being a hero of your own story. And once again, what I love about the paradox is not the brutal facts. What I love about the paradox is this unrelenting focus on, I will choose to be happy. I will choose to find success. I will choose to be the hero of my story, to be accountable for my story, right? And then move forward in a way where I create success in my life. So the Stockdale Paradox. You ever get a chance? Read about James Stockdale. Read about how he went through hell, and came out on the other side with a story that we can all learn from. It's such a great thing. If you ever want to do some coaching with me also, just know that you can do a 45-minute free consult with me, and just click on the link that is below, and it'll take you there. Thanks, and take care.